Hello there, this is Attorney Mike Steck here with Clarier Law today to talk about NFA Firearms and Gun Trusts. Wanted to put together a quick little presentation with everything that you ever really wanted to know about NFA Firearms and some options with the Gun Trusts. First of all, Clarier Law is a law firm here in Utah dedicated to business, privacy, and firearm needs, and do a lot of gun trusts and other business and privacy representation. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions after the presentation here. First of all is the National Firearms Act. Many people are learning about national firearms and referred to them as Class 3 guns. They fall under this regulation of the National Firearms Act. And we have Title I, which is the Gun Control Act, and Title II, which is the National Firearms Act. The background here is that it was enacted after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and after a growing concern in 1933 about the use of military-grade firearms and ownership with civilians. And the term that was used in the legislation was that it was to combat the flow of gangster firearms. And you can see here a picture of these gangsters. And coincidentally, the firearm that's being used there isn't even a short barrel shotgun. So there's a lot of people who talk about the use of firearms in this massacre that sort of triggered it, especially on suppressors, where suppressors weren't even really used. They were just brought in last minute as a possible concern, which is where some people are trying to get the National Firearms Act to be amended to take out suppressors. But in general, the National Firearms Act restricts the manufacture, ownership, and transfer of these types of firearms. And the types of firearms that we're dealing with here primarily are these firearms here, the machine guns. Basically any firearm that fires more than one round with one trigger pull. So it could be a select fire that you squeeze the trigger and it's got 3 rounds, or a true full auto, which is as long as you hold the trigger down, the gun will fire. Short barrel rifles, which are rifles with anything less than a 16-inch barrel, and also a short barrel shotgun, which is anything less than an 18-inch barrel. And the AOWs applies to any other weapons and destructive devices. And there's a lot of categories there, and we could actually have an entire presentation as to what an AOW is. But most people are after, and also suppressors. Suppressors should also be on this list here: short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, suppressors, and occasionally machine guns. You can own a machine gun, and they just tend to be pretty expensive. One of the main pieces of legislative evolution to the National Firearms Act from Congress was an effective date of May 19th of 1986 that basically affected the ability to transfer and have a machine gun that was manufactured after that date transferred to civilians. And so they're still able to be produced and are produced, but they're limited to law enforcement agencies, military organizations, National Guard units, etc. So the manufacture of those, and also they're made as dealer samples, but you can own them as a civilian, and what you're after is going to be a transferable pre-86 machine gun or machine pistol. Most people who are looking into owning an NFA item are looking at one of the 3 pathways of ownership. And I should note here that as of the recording and production of this video, the ATF does have an impending change, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. But this information is current as of right now. You can apply as an individual, and many people have done this without knowing of some of the other benefits of a corporation or a trust. It's the most lengthy, and because you have all of this preliminary stuff, you've got the chief law enforcement officer to sign off on your application. You're required to get fingerprints and photos, and you are restricted in your possession to simply the person who applies for the transfer. Now, every single person who applies or entity has the $200 stamp that they have to pay for, and it's a transfer tax on each item. Each serial number is going to have that. Now, the corporation is another option that's available to people. There's some flexibility in that you can have multiple managers or officers on the corporation or an LLC. but it's going to be more expensive to have it set up. As you'll see here in a minute, the trust generally is a little bit less expensive. But there's not really any estate planning provisions that are allocated for, and pretty much as the corporation dies, it does away with those guns, and it's going to have to deal with them. And so many people really prefer the trust. And as I said, this is current as of the current recording. There's a multi-person access to these firearms. You can have additional authorized users on the trust. We would call them an additional trustee. There's no law enforcement sign-off, and we have the estate planning aspect of, you can pass these things on to your family after you pass away in a pretty seamless fashion. And so it's good for the estate planning and also the multi-person access. Now, in a trust, many people wonder who the people are. You may have heard different terms: trustor, settlor, or grantor. They're basically all the same thing. It's just a matter of what term is used by the person drafting the trust. The trustor is the person who's creating this trust. It's also the main person for whose benefit those provisions are enacted. The trustee becomes the person who is going to be in lawful possession of the NFA items that are in the trust, and a beneficiary has future rights that are vested at a future date. Now, many times the ATF, what they're looking for in an application, they're wanting to make sure that the trust appears to be current and valid, that there's an address, and that the things that the trust owns, if there is a Schedule A, that the trust is reflecting that. Now, it does not have to have a Schedule A, but that's a little bit more technical as we get into actual trust drafting that you'd want to check with your attorney on. When the ATF is reviewing your trust, the ATF investigators, they're really not verifying that the trust is valid per se. They just, if you were to call and ask them, they would say that we only verify, or we say that there's nothing that appears to violate state law, because these trusts are matters of state law, not federal law, which is where one of the concerns is for an online gun trust, is there's no real assurances that your trust is drafted for your state and your state's needs. And so that's the other thing the ATF would say. If you were to call and ask them and say, you approving my form, does that mean that that you approve of the trust and that it's a valid trust? And let's say, no, we only make sure that it doesn't appear to violate state law. Now, at least here in Utah and for many states, there's no trust registration. You don't need to register it with the state and also with the ATF. You're not actually registering the trust. They're just reviewing it to make sure that everything appears to be in order. Now, the NFA applications and that process is generally done with the gun shop and the customer. I would rely on a gun shop to be very knowledgeable about how to submit the forms correctly on a Form 4 transfer, making sure those things are done appropriately. Now, as I mentioned before, there are some ATF changes that are impending that are going to affect the gun laws here under Title II. And basically what's going to happen, and it's an ATF federal rule change. It's now known as 41F. It changes up a little bit of the trust benefits in that trusts are no longer exempted from this background check requirement. And so each person that you have on your trust is going to be required to get a set of fingerprints done and a photo, probably two passport-sized photos, and submit that with the application in order for that person to have a background check run. Now, it's actually a step forward on this change because that chief law enforcement certification has been done away with, and it's now simply a notification. And so many people weren't able to get NFA items because their chief law enforcement officer didn't believe in them or for whatever reason thought they weren't appropriate. And so it basically eliminates that certification aspect, and it simply becomes a notification. And so one of the recommendations on the trust that I've been sharing with people as this change has been impending is to keep your trust very simple in its creation so that you don't have too many trustees, too many authorized users down the road to make it difficult with the actual application. Because the ATF is not really looking at adding in additional burdens upon future transfers on these NFA items. Now, in dealing with NFA forms, most consumers are generally only interested in two of these forms. We have a Form 1 and a Form 4. But just so that you're aware, I wanted to offer some information here on the actual forms that are out there. The NFA Form 1, the Form 1 is the non-licensee manufacturer of an NFA firearm. Now, many people will use this to manufacture their own short barrel rifle. They'll take a lower receiver and they'll build it up into a short barrel rifle, and then have that item. And now, one of the things there that is commonly asked is it required to engrave on the firearm? And while the legislation and the rules don't specifically say that you have to do that on a Form 1, in conversations with the ATF, it's a recommended best practice, because technically you become a manufacturer in the process and in the stream of commerce on that gun, and so they want to know who is the person who converted it into an NFA item. Now, a Form 2 is what a manufacturer, a Type 7 FFL, is going to be dealing with. They're going to be turning this firearm into an NFA gun. Let's say they're doing a conversion, just like building it out of an AR-15 lower receiver, or they're actually manufacturing a suppressor. They're a machine shop, or they're a suppressor manufacturer, and they're actually machining the tube and all of the baffles and all of the pieces that go into the suppressor. Those guns are registered with the ATF on what's called a Form 2. Now, when those guns are completed, they transfer between dealer to dealer on what's called a Form 3. And that Form 3 is a tax-exempt transfer. And so I'll make a quick mention here. Many people refer to these NFA items as what we call, they'll say, a Class 3 item. Well, Class 3 is not technically accurate, because Class 3 just refers to a type of dealer. And so, for example, a dealer who is a retail dealer might be a Type 1 FFL with a Class 3 SOT, and the SOT refers to their special occupational taxpayer, which allows them to deal in this Form 3 tax-exempt transfer. And so that's where the term Class 3 came up. Now, a manufacturer who is a Type 7 federal firearms license holder, they may be, they're going to have a Class 2 SOT. And so the Class 2 can transfer between a Class 3 with this tax-exempt transfer. Now, they actually pay money every single year, either $500 to $1,000, depending upon the volume of their company, in dealing with how much they're allowed to do this tax-exempt transfer. Now, for this, the consumer, when you purchase this firearm, so for example, the firearm would be made on a Form 2 and registered into the National Firearms Act registry, and then transferred to the dealer on a Form 3, and then a Form 4 would be produced to transfer that item from the gun shop to the individual. That's where the tax paid transfer comes in, the $200 tax. And now, when that person passes away, or in dealing with the estate, the Form 5 is used as a tax-exempt transfer to a lawful heir. And that's one of the nice things about the trust, is that we have it all set up with beneficiaries, so it's very clear as to where the transfer is to go and who that lawful heir is. So that pretty much covers it. That's a high-level overview of the National Firearms Act and many of the provisions there. Also, some of the impending changes with 41F, which is slotted to happen July 13th is the last date that I saw. And also covers many of the forms and some of the process there. Now, obviously, I'm of the opinion that the NFA trust, the gun trust, is one of the best ways of owning these NFA items, simply because of that multi-person access, and also the estate planning and letting your family know exactly how you want these firearms to be dealt with. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I do practice law here in Utah, and will focus on the gun trust here in Utah. And I'll try to answer questions as they come up. But it is best to speak with your attorney to have questions answered specific to you and to your state and to your situation. And if I don't answer the questions right here, right away, I'll do my best to get to them as soon as possible. Thanks for watching, and hope you have a great day, and enjoy this video on. Hope you enjoyed this video on NFA trusts and also the National Firearms Act.